stop this right now. This tower won't stand, it's going down.
Listen to me. $300 million project, 25 floors, 500 condos. Pre-sales open next month.
Just take care of the inspector, Barrett. Slide him $25,000 and get the report stamped. I want shovels in the ground by Monday.
Sir, don't build this tower. It's gonna fall in 6 months.
And who exactly are you?
Pedicab driver, sir. Born and raised in this neighborhood.
A pedicab driver is going to teach me engineering? I've got MIT consultants on this project, $300 million. And you're telling me it's going to fall?
Sir, your engineers didn't see this land 30 years ago.
I did.
There was a pond right under us, spring-fed, deep. Get out of here. If I see you near this site again, I'll smash that pedicab into kindling. At me, sir. Break my pedicab. But 6 months from now, when the cracks start showing in your tower walls, you remember my face.
Charleston, South Carolina, the old jewel of the Low Country. Cobblestone streets, antebellum mansions, wrought iron balconies dripping with Spanish moss, and salt marshes stretching to the horizon. A city built on tidal water, where the ocean has always had the last word. But in the West Ashley district of Charleston, just across the river from the historic downtown, a story had been buried in the dirt for 30 long years. Buried so deep that only one man in the entire city remembered the truth, and that man was a pedicab driver named Sam Hollis. He remembered because he had seen the truth with his own eyes when he was 8 years old. 30 years ago, on the very plot of land where the gleaming new Brennan Heights Tower was now rising into the Carolina sky, there had been a 200-year-old freshwater pond, spring-fed Magnolia Pond, the lifeblood of the entire neighborhood. 500 families had drawn their water from it. Children had splashed in its shallows every summer. Old men had played dominoes on its banks every evening. And in the rainy season, the pond would swell so wide that the whole West Ashley flatland turned green with reflected sky and Spanish moss. Then, 30 years ago, a man named Walter Brennan came to the neighborhood. A real estate developer, the father of Wyatt Brennan. Walter slid envelopes of cash to 3 Charleston County records officers, $25,000 each. He had the pond reclassified in the county registry as Times Drive vacant lot. He hired a fleet of 200 trucks to dump filled dirt and construction rubble into the water. 6 months of dumping, day and night. The pond vanished. The land was leveled. And in the official county record, 200 years of clean spring water became Times' privately owned dry parcel. Registered to Walter Brennan, 500 families lost their water source overnight. The neighborhood fought back. They marched on the city offices. They wrote letters to the Post and Courier. They begged the council. "Give us back our pond." Walter Brennan answered, with hired men. 3 protesters were beaten in the alleys behind the corner store. 2 homes were set on fire in the middle of the night. The Charleston police never filed a single report because Walter Brennan played golf every Sunday with the state senator. Slowly, family by family, the neighborhood went silent. 30 years passed. Walter Brennan died of a heart attack 10 years ago. His son Wyatt inherited everything, and Wyatt was sharper, hungrier, more dangerous than his father had ever been. Wyatt announced a $300 million luxury residential project on that exact piece of land. Brennan Heights, the most prestigious address in the Low Country. 25 floors, 500 condos, reservations from $100,000. Billboards across the entire city. Television commercials with helicopter shots of the rising tower. But there was one thing Wyatt Brennan either did not know or chose to ignore. The land beneath his glass and steel tower was a filled-in pond. The clay bed of that pond still sat exactly where it had sat for 200 years, 12 feet below the surface. The natural slope of the entire West Ashley flatland still drained rainwater into that exact spot, the way it had since before George Washington was born. A man could pile 30 years of dirt on top of a pond, but a man could not change the slope of the earth. He could not change where rainwater wanted to go. And when 25 floors of concrete and steel sat on top of soft-filled dirt over a buried clay basin that filled with water every single rainy season, the foundation would not hold. Within 5 to 7 years, the building would begin to lean. Hairline cracks would spider up the inner walls, and eventually the tower would come down. This was not guesswork. This was civil engineering, and a pedicab driver knew it better than the MIT consultants did. Sam Hollis was 38 years old. He had driven pedicabs through downtown Charleston for the last 20 years, hauling tourists up and down Meeting Street and King Street, $6 a ride, $150 on a good day. Sam had been 8 years old when Walter Brennan filled in the pond, and he had stood at the edge of the muddy water with his father, an old shrimper named Ezra Hollis, and watched the trucks empty load after load of dirt into the water. Sam had cried that day. He had cried because the pond was where his mother used to wash linen, where his sister had learned to swim, where his father took him fishing for sunfish on Sunday mornings. And Ezra Hollis had put a heavy weathered hand on Sam's small shoulder and said something that the boy never forgot in 30 years. "Son, they can fill this pond up with all the dirt in South Carolina, but the land remembers. The water knows where it belongs. And one day, somebody is going to come along who listens to what the land is saying. Maybe that somebody is going to be you." Ezra Hollis was right. For 20 straight years driving his pedicab past that lot in every season, Sam had watched the rainwater of every summer thunderstorm pool up in that exact spot, 2 and 3 feet deep, while every other lot in West Ashley drained dry. "The pond remembers itself," Sam would whisper. And now, 25 floors were rising on top of it, with 500 families about to move in. Sam Hollis went home to his small clapboard house on Maybank Highway, with the print of Wyatt Brennan's hand still burning on his cheek and a thin line of blood crusted on his lip. His wife Rachel saw the mark on his face the moment he walked through the screen door, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Sam, what happened? Who hit you?" Sam said nothing. He sat at the kitchen table, took a long drink of cold, sweet tea from the jar in the icebox, and stared at the photograph of his father Ezra hanging on the wall above the stove. Ezra Hollis in his old yellow oilskin, holding a string of fish, smiling into the Carolina sun. Sam looked at that photograph for a long time, and then he picked up the phone. The next morning, Sam pedaled his rusted old pedicab 3 miles down to the small white church on Sycamore Avenue, because that was where the old men of West Ashley still gathered every Tuesday morning to drink black coffee and play checkers on the front porch. Sam needed the oldest one of all of them, a 78-year-old retired postal worker named Old Henry Dawkins. Henry had lived in West Ashley since the day he was born, and Henry had been there the day Walter Brennan started filling in Magnolia Pond. Sam asked the question, "Mr. Henry, I need proof the pond was real, something on paper, something a federal judge would respect." Henry sipped his coffee for a long minute, and then he leaned forward in his rocking chair. "Son, in the spring of 1985, before they filled it in, a survey team came through here from the United States Geological Survey. Federal boys. They mapped every creek, every marsh, every pond in the low country, all the way down to Edisto Island. That map is a federal record, son, belongs to the central government in Washington. No county clerk and no Charleston builder has the authority to touch it. If that pond was on the USGS map in 1985, then that pond was real, and the county lied. You go to the Federal Records Office downtown, and you put in a Freedom of Information request. That map will come back to you with the federal seal on it." Sam did not know how to file a FOIA request. He had a 5th grade education and 20 years of pedicab calluses on his hands. But there was a young man in the neighborhood named Marcus Bell, 22 years old, a 3rd-year law student at the Charleston School of Law, whom Sam had been pedaling to class every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 full years for free because Marcus's mother was a widow on disability and the boy was the first in his family to ever go to college. Sam went to Marcus's mother's house that same evening. Marcus opened the door, and Sam laid the whole story out on the kitchen table in plain words. Marcus listened without saying a single word, and then he stood up and pulled his laptop out of his backpack. "Mr. Sam, I'll file the FOIA tonight. Federal records have a 30-day response window. Don't you worry about a thing." 31 days later, a thick brown envelope arrived in Sam's mailbox with the seal of the United States Geological Survey, stamped in dark blue ink. Sam sat on his porch with Marcus and Rachel and unfolded the map slowly with his rough fingers. And there it was, drawn in fine black ink, surveyed and certified by federal cartographers in 1985. Magnolia Pond. 2.4 acres, average depth 12 feet, spring-fed freshwater body, public access. And the boundary of that pond on the federal map matched, inch for inch, the boundary of the construction site where Wyatt Brennan was now pouring concrete for the foundation of a 25-story tower. The county said dry, vacant lot. The federal government said 2-acre pond. 2 government records, the same parcel of land, telling 2 completely opposite stories. One of them had to be a lie, and a federal record could not be touched. But a map alone was not enough. Sam needed engineering proof that building on top of that filled-in pond was dangerous. Soil testing in private labs cost between $5,000 and $10,000, and Sam Hollis had $312 in his savings account. So Sam pedaled all the way across the Ashley River Bridge to the College of Charleston, the civil engineering department on Calhoun Street, and asked at the front desk for Professor David Coleman, a man Marcus had recommended because Professor Coleman ran a pro bono soil mechanics research lab, specifically for low-income community cases. Sam waited on a wooden bench outside the professor's office for 4 hours. When Professor Coleman finally walked out, 55 years old with white hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, he looked at the sweating pedicab driver in the torn shirt and asked the obvious question. "Son, what brings you here?" Sam laid the USGS map on the desk. He told the entire story in 20 minutes. Spring-fed pond, 200 years old, filled by Walter Brennan in 1995. 25-story tower now rising on the same clay basin. Rainwater still pooling on that exact lot every summer. 500 families about to sign closing papers. Professor Coleman read the map in silence, set his coffee down, and looked up at Sam over the rim of his glasses. "Son, if a 12-foot pond was filled with construction rubble and topped with dirt, and if a 25-story building is being founded on that fill without proper deep piling, then you are looking at a catastrophic structural failure within 7 to 10 years. I am taking this case as my fall semester research project. My team and I will run boreholes at 4 points along the perimeter at no cost to you. Be at the site Saturday morning at 7. 2 weeks later, Professor Coleman's lab report landed on Sam's kitchen table. 46 pages, signed and sealed by a tenured federal grant-eligible engineer. Subsurface soil is artificial fill to a depth of 12 feet. Underlying stratum is undisturbed clay basin consistent with a former spring-fed pond. Water table sits at 8 feet below grade and rises to 4 feet during heavy rainfall. Bearing capacity is critically inadequate for a 25-story load-bearing structure. High probability of differential settlement, foundation cracking, and progressive structural failure within 5 to 7 years of full occupancy. Immediate cessation of construction is recommended on grounds of public safety. Sam now had 3 weapons in his hand. The federal USGS map proving the pond existed, the College of Charleston soil report proving the building would fail, and the Charleston County record showing the lot as dry vacant land, which directly contradicted the federal map and exposed 30 years of records fraud. Marcus Bell drafted an emergency petition that same night addressed to the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina, citing violations of the Clean Water Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and federal records fraud. Marcus filed the petition the next morning at 8 sharp. By 8 o'clock that evening, Wyatt Brennan knew everything. Sam never found out who tipped him off, but a county clerk or a courthouse runner had picked up the phone. By 10 the next morning, Wyatt had moved on 4 fronts at once. A false police report was filed against Sam Hollis for Time's theft of construction materials, and a Charleston detective showed up at Sam's house. The Charleston Transportation Board suspended Sam's pedicab permit for Time's unregistered tourist operation. Wyatt's lawyers filed a formal complaint to the College of Charleston, accusing Professor Coleman of Time's unauthorized private soil testing using university equipment. And at 11:30 that night, 4 men in a black pickup truck pulled up in front of Sam's house. They did not get out of the truck. The driver rolled down his window and called Sam to the porch. "Pedicab man, drop the petition, or your wife works the night shift at the diner alone, and your kids walk 3 blocks to school by themselves, and we know the route." Rachel broke down crying on the kitchen floor. "Sam, please, drop it. We are too small to fight men like this." Sam sat across from her at the table and held her hands for a long time without speaking. Then he stood up, walked over to the photograph of Ezra Hollis on the wall, and looked his dead father in the eye. "Pa, you said the land remembers. If I forget it now, 500 children are going to sleep in that tower the night it falls. I cannot live with that, not in this life." The next morning at 7, Sam Hollis pedaled up to the steps of the federal courthouse in downtown Charleston. He was not alone. Behind him stood 200 people, the old men from the church porch, the young mothers from the neighborhood, the grandchildren of every family that had once drawn water from Magnolia Pond. They had walked 3 miles in the South Carolina heat to stand with one pedicab driver. And when Wyatt Brennan's lawyers stepped out of their black sedan, they froze on the courthouse steps, because what they saw was not a man they could buy or break. They saw a neighborhood that had remembered, after 30 long years of silence, that they were still alive. The federal hearing began at 9 sharp in the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina. Before Judge Margaret Whitlock, a 60-year-old former environmental prosecutor who had spent her career on coastal wetlands cases, Marcus Bell stood up in his borrowed suit, his hands shaking slightly, and laid the 3 documents on the bench. The USGS map of 1985, the College of Charleston soil report, the Charleston County record marked Time's dry, vacant lot, Wyatt Brennan's lead attorney, a $500 an hour lawyer from a downtown firm, rose to dismiss the petition as the Times fantasy of an uneducated pedicab driver. Judge Whitlock looked at him over her glasses and said one sentence that emptied the air out of the courtroom. "Counselor, the United States Geological Survey is not a fantasy. Sit down." By noon, Judge Whitlock had ordered an emergency 48-hour halt on all construction at Brennan Heights, mobilized a joint EPA and FBI environmental crimes team to the site, and frozen Wyatt Brennan's company assets pending federal investigation. 3 days later, the federal team arrived in Charleston. 8 specialists, a senior soil engineer, a hydrologist, a wetlands ecologist, and a retired federal magistrate leading the inspection. They drilled 8 boreholes around the construction site, 20 feet deep, 4 times deeper than Professor Coleman's original tests. And what came up out of those holes turned the magistrate's face to stone. 12 feet of artificial fill, exactly as the College of Charleston had reported. Below that, undisturbed clay bed, the unmistakable signature of a long-buried pond. And below the clay, water. So much water that within an hour the boreholes were rising over their edges, dark spring water bubbling up onto the dry construction lot for the first time in 30 years. The land remembered. The water knew exactly where it belonged. The federal hydrologist looked at Sam Hollis standing at the edge of the site in his torn shirt and said quietly, "Mr. Hollis, your father was right." The federal court issued a permanent injunction within 48 hours. Construction stopped forever. All 500 condo pre-sales canceled. Every buyer's deposit refunded with interest. Wyatt Brennan charged under the Clean Water Act, the federal records fraud statute, and reckless endangerment of public safety. But the FBI did not stop with one site. They pulled 30 years of Walter Brennan's old county filings, every parcel he had ever bought, every record he had ever altered, and what they uncovered 3 weeks later collapsed the entire Brennan empire. Walter Brennan had not filled in only one pond. He had filled in 7. 7 freshwater wetlands across the Charleston Low Country, each one bribed off the county books and reclassified as dry vacant land. Each one then developed into a residential or commercial tower. Altogether, a $1.2 billion real estate empire built on 7 buried bodies of water. The FBI ordered emergency soil tests on the other 6 sites. 4 of the 6 already showed visible cracks in their inner walls. 2 were declared structurally unsafe and evacuated within 72 hours. 800 more families learned they had been living, sleeping, raising their children on top of buried ponds for years and never once known it. Sam Hollis had fought for 1 pond, and 7 came back to the surface. Wyatt Brennan was arrested on a Tuesday morning at his downtown office, escorted out in handcuffs in front of the local television cameras. As the federal marshals walked him to the SUV, the small crowd that had gathered outside the building parted to let him through. 200 people, the old men of West Ashley, their children, their grandchildren, the same families Walter Brennan had silenced 30 years earlier. And in the front row of that crowd stood old Henry Dawkins, 78 years old, leaning on his cane. Wyatt looked up and met the old man's eyes. Henry did not raise his voice. He simply spoke loud enough for Wyatt to hear. "Son, your daddy filled a pond, and you built a palace on top of it. But you can't bury water forever. Water always finds its way back. Today the water came back, and your road ended." 6 months later, the federal court delivered its verdict. Wyatt Brennan, 15 years in federal prison for environmental fraud, records tampering, and reckless endangerment. The full $1.2 billion Brennan portfolio seized by the federal government and liquidated. 1,300 families relocated to safer housing at federal expense. 3 living Charleston County clerks who had taken bribes from Walter Brennan 30 years ago, all 3 indicted, and Walter Brennan himself, dead for 10 years, posthumously charged in the federal record, so the Brennan name would forever carry the weight of what he had done. But the real verdict came not from the court, it came from the land itself. The EPA officially restored the West Ashley site to protected freshwater wetland status. Crews demolished the half-built tower. The foundation slab was broken up and hauled away. 12 feet of fill dirt was carefully excavated, load by load, until the original clay basin lay open to the Carolina sky again, for the first time in 30 years. And then the rains came. June, July, August, the long low country summer storms. And week by week, the water returned. The springs underneath, dormant for 3 decades, began to flow again. By the end of the rainy season, Magnolia Pond was a pond once more. 2.4 acres, 12 feet deep at its center. Fish returned. Cattails grew along the edges. White egrets came back to fish in the shallows at sunrise. The neighborhood stood on the banks the day the water filled the basin to its old shoreline, and they wept, all 200 of them, old and young together. The pond their parents had grown up on, the pond Walter Brennan had stolen from them, had returned in their lifetime. The neighborhood petitioned the city to rename the pond. The Charleston County Council approved it unanimously. A simple gray granite marker was installed at the edge of the water. The inscription read, Sam Pond. This water is 200 years old. It was buried for 30. A pedicab driver brought it home. Sam Hollis was awarded a Federal Citizen Bravery Medal and a settlement of $75,000 from the Brennan estate. Sam used the money to put Marcus Bell through his final year of law school, to buy his wife Rachel a small used car so she would never have to walk the night shift home alone again, and to repair the same old pedicab his father Ezra had given him at 16. He did not buy a new one. He repaired the old one, the same one. And every evening at sunset, Sam pedals down West Ashley Avenue, past the new pond, and he stops his pedicab on the old wooden footbridge for 1 full minute. He looks at the water, he listens to the egrets, and he pedals home. One evening, Sam's 8-year-old son Caleb was riding on the back of the pedicab and asked, "Daddy, why do you stop here every single day?" Sam looked at the orange sun melting into the water, the Spanish moss swaying in the salt breeze, and he said quietly, Son, my daddy told me a long time ago that the land remembers. I stop here every evening just to make sure the land has not forgotten." Caleb looked down at the calm pond, at the white birds gliding low over the water, at the same Carolina sun that had shone on this water 200 years ago, vanished for 30, and returned. "Daddy," the boy said softly, "the land remembered." Sam Hollis smiled, leaned forward on the pedals of his old pedicab, and rolled gently into the South Carolina dusk. Friends, like this video. Comment below, is there a pond, a wetland, or a river in your town that someone buried under concrete? Could it ever come home? Share this with anyone who believes one ordinary person cannot beat a billionaire. Subscribe and ring the bell. Every story brings you a new truth first. Remember this, the earth keeps her own ledger, and her memory is longer than any contract, any title deed, any signature on any piece of paper. You can fill a pond with all the dirt in the world. You can bury a river under 1,000 tons of concrete, but the slope of the land does not forget. The water knows where it belongs. And one day, sooner or later, the water always finds its way home.